Hey, 4C divers, thank you for tuning in. It is Facebook Live, and we're sorry for that 5-minute delay, but we are live. It is Tuesday, July 20th, 2021, and we have a great presentation for you guys, so make sure you say hello to our guest presenter. We have Dr. Mark Butler on the line. There he is. And we are very excited for tonight's presentation about lobster tails. Go ahead and make sure you say hello to us in the comments section. Let us know where you're listening in from. Are you here in Florida? Are you outside of Florida? Are you outside of the US? Are you in space like where everybody else seems to be going these days? We want to know, where are you at? Also, give us that thumbs up, give us that smiley face or that heart emoji. Let us know you're enjoying the presentation, and you can always write comments or any questions that you might have for our guest presenter, and we will make sure to get those answered at the end. All right. Again, guys, you know the drill. We always do a nice little raffle at the end to give you guys free stuff for paying attention and listening in. So we have a $50 gift card to raffle off tonight. Make sure you go to www.force-e.com and go to the event tab. Go ahead and find tonight's presentation. Go to Eventbrite, register. That ends at 6:45. I will pull your names out, put you in a random name picker, and we'll go ahead and get you that $50 gift card to the winner. Guys, you can use that here at the stores, especially to come and get your gear to go diving this weekend or next week for mini season. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our guest presenter. We've got everyone saying hello. There they are. And we've got Dr. Mark Butler on the line here. He is going to be talking to you guys about lobsters and what he does here locally in South Florida. So, Mark, it is your floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's interesting to see, folks, where everybody's coming from. So thank you to Nicole for inviting me here and getting a chance to talk to you guys about lobsters. I know that many of you are probably interested and excited about lobster season coming up this year, and the mini season in particular for divers. Why am I giving this talk? Well, I guess I'm kind of like the lobster god. I just have to say that. No, actually, I've been working with lobsters and studying lobsters since 1984 in Florida and the Keys, and actually I'm involved in a number of lobster projects around the world with other species. And so hopefully it'll give a chance to tell you a little bit about this particular species, some of its biology, and some of the things that we've worked on in recent years. And then at the end, if you have some questions, happy to answer any of those. So let's just, I'll go ahead and begin with the presentation. I'm currently a professor at Florida International University. Previously, I was at Old Dominion University in Norfolk for many years, but I've been working again in the Keys and the Caribbean for, I don't know, 30-something, almost 40 years now. Now, this evening's presentation, you may have seen it. I'm going to be talking about some things that maybe don't make sense, but they will. Homelessness, pestilence, and alien encounters. But before we could talk about these kinds of things, I think we have to have a little Lobster 101 class, okay? Let me tell you a little bit more about the life history of these creatures, the fascinating life history. And a lot of the things we now know about lobsters, in fact, it was my research team and some others that actually discovered. So it's been a really great journey for us to figure out how these creatures work. Now, of course, all of you here in South Florida know this ain't a lobster. Well, in fact, it is. But, most people think when they think of lobsters, they think of this kind of thing. They think of the clawed lobster, the American lobster. But it's interesting, clawed lobsters like these, American lobsters, there's only really 3 species that are fished, and they're all in the North Atlantic. Around the rest of the world, when people think of lobsters, they think of spiny lobsters. Now, those of us who are in South Florida, and particularly if you're down in the Florida Keys, where a lot of folks will be going soon to collect some lobsters, you know that this, again, is not, as clawed lobster is not what we're looking for. This is a clawed lobster. It's in the family Homaridae. What we're looking for is this beautiful creature, much more elegant than that brutish looking thing with the claws. This is the Caribbean spiny lobster, Panularis argus. Now, this particular species actually ranges all the way from the northern part of South America, all the way up through our area. You can find it off the coast of North Carolina, and believe it or not, there are a few populations off the coast of Africa, some of the islands that are over there, and you might wonder how they get there, and I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. We also have, and my research team has done a lot of work on these too, The spotted spiny lobster, which also occurs throughout the Caribbean, Panularis guttatus. If you haven't seen those, it's probably because you haven't been night diving enough. But if you're on the shallow reefs at night, you'll see lots of this species out, and we've also been studying these. So all of the spiny lobsters around the world are in the family called Palonuridae. This is actually the ornate spiny lobster, and this species is found off of the Great Barrier Reef. But there are about 200 species, believe it or not, of spiny lobsters that occur throughout the world's oceans. And you can see here everything that's on this world distribution of the palonurid lobsters, the ones of the spiny lobsters. They occur pretty much everywhere in the world except North Atlantic and the North Pacific. So they find them throughout the rest of the world, all these different species of spiny lobsters. And wherever they occur in, they're fished. Obviously, people enjoy consuming them. Now, we have some other lobsters, too, that some people don't know about. And certainly we have a number of these you can find here in South Florida. The slipper lobsters, they're in the family called the Celeridae. And those funny-looking paddles on the front of their head are actually their modified antennae. So we can find these. There's about a half a dozen species that occur in South Florida, so you can find them. If you're lucky enough to find one of these, and if you found one of these on a reef, you had to have been night diving, because there's another group of lobsters called the fuzzy lobsters. They're in the family Synaxidae. So this is called the copper lobster. And to be honest, I've only seen a handful of these over the years. They're very, very shy. They tend to stay entirely back into the reef recesses. But every now and then on a night dive, you'll see these remarkable colored creatures. Now, as I was mentioned before, spiny lobsters, they're widespread and abundant around the world. But wherever we find them, they're also ecologically consequential in a lot of ways. A lot of things eat them, particularly when they're young and small. A lot of fishes eat them. But later on, they're important benthic predators. Some people say, oh, they're scavengers and all, but that's really not true. Most of them prey primarily on things like gastropods, so snails and clams and urchins and things like that. We study them a lot too because their life cycle is similar to many other tropical coastal species. So in fact, spiny lobster has a life cycle that's very, very similar, for example, to say a Nassau grouper. And of course, wherever they occur, they support economically valuable fisheries. Now, in the Caribbean, believe it or not, the spiny lobster represents the most valuable fishery in the Caribbean. Now, most of that's commercial fishing, but there is some recreational fishing, as you might imagine. And it's about a $1 billion a year business. And you can see here this graph. These are the 10 countries. These 10 countries are where most of the lobsters are caught. 90% of the catch from the entire Caribbean just comes from this. And you can see the greatest catch is in the Bahamas, then Cuba, then Nicaragua, and the USA is in fourth there. And the USA in this case is just Florida, pretty much. We do have spiny lobsters on the West Coast in the south portion of California, but it's a completely different species. In Florida, it's the second most valuable commercial fishery. But if we also add in the recreational fishery, the diver-based fishery, it becomes the most important fishery in the state of Florida. Now, this gives you just a graph, how's the fishery been over the years? And here you can see starting back in actually 1988 up until last year, you can see this is the commercial landing. So this also represents pretty much the lobsters that are available to you guys as divers. And one of the things you'll notice if you look at this kind of graph of their abundance over time is that there was a major shift around 2000, where the whole system changed and actually decreased by about 25 or 30%. And that's been fairly persistent. Of course, from year to year, there's a lot of variation up and down, but you can see the averages have shifted down about 30%. And many of us around the scientists around the Caribbean have been, puzzling over this, and we don't have a perfect explanation. But I think the reigning hypothesis is that what we've seen is a change in the amount of spawning stock. What they mean by is the number of females that are reproducing and the size of those females. So it's not just Florida, but throughout the Caribbean, you'll see that this species is all linked. Its biology throughout the Caribbean. And as you might, this also in the bottom just shows this is the commercial dockside value for the commercial fisheries. And you might wonder Why in the recent years has the price gone up in the dockside value? And that's due to two things. First is just plain economics. When things are in shorter supply, they become more expensive. But also in recent years, most of the lobsters in Florida that were caught commercially, now they're going live to China. And that's a recent phenomenon with the rise of the Chinese economy. Before that, it was all frozen tails and it was less expensive. But the Chinese are paying top dollar for it. And so from the commercial fisherman's point of view, this is a good thing. They now ship live and are making more money at it. And here's just another kind of graphic to give you some feel for, if for the value of various species here in Florida. If you take a couple of these species are just commercial. So shrimp and stone crab. Shrimp by far at $52 million in Florida. That's the annual average of how much money is coming in from shrimp fishing in Florida. Second to that would be stone crab. And you can see the commercial fishing for lobsters really close there at 32 million. But the recreational fishing for lobsters is also quite valuable. And so if you add those two together, the Florida fishery for lobsters is the most valuable fishery in the state of Florida. So very important here as a species for humans, at least. Now, as I was mentioning before, lobsters have a life cycle that frankly is very similar to that what we see on a lot of other coastal species. And it's not like the kind of life cycle you see on, say, farm animals. Lobsters are not chickens. And what I mean by that is that the lobsters have what we call a complex life cycle that has multiple different life stages, and each of those life stages requires a different habitat. So if you're thinking about from a conservation point of view, this poses some problems because you can't, for example, like the Florida panther, just preserve the Everglades. You have to preserve multiple different habitats to preserve lobsters over a much bigger area. So just to kind of step through this, you see on the bottom there is adult lobsters, and most of the adult lobsters live out in deeper areas, rocky crevices, in particular on coral reefs. And when the females release their eggs, they produce a little spider-like larvae you can see there on the one side of the screen. And this little larvae, we refer to them, we call them phyllosome larvae. They float and also migrate up and down the water column out at sea for approximately 7 or 8 months. Now, spiny lobsters have the longest larval planktonic duration of any species in the world. There's a species of lobster that lives in Australia whose larvae float around the plankton and are predators in the plankton for 2 years. Now, I'll give you some examples a little bit later on about how different species, how long their planktonic larval durations are. So for lobsters, it's very, very long. Now you can imagine if this little spider-like thing that starts out the size of a pinhead, but by the time it completes its 8-month journey in the open sea, it's about the size of a silver dollar. They're quite big, and they're feeding in the plankton the whole time. But these things, if they're out in the plankton that period of time, you can imagine in the open sea how far they can be dispersed. And that's why in the Caribbean, the spiny lobster is truly a species that lives throughout the Caribbean, and the populations in the Caribbean are all interlinked. So after about that 8-month time period, you see up at the top there, they actually metamorphose into something we call a post larvae. And that happens probably about, like in Florida, it happens about 20 miles offshore. And that little, clear thing, which you can see in that picture, is actually on the end of my finger. That little clear post-larval lobster swims. It's transported by the tides, but it also swims inshore. And how do they know where inshore is? Believe it or not, they smell it. We've identified a particular species or type of algae that I'll show you pictures of it, that they can smell. And they actively swim for days to get inshore. And also, they only come in at night on a rising tide during the new moon when it's darkest. So every month of the year, this species at night, you think of it sometime at night on a rising tide during a new moon when it's darkest, that's when they're coming inshore. And they come in, they look for nursery habitats. I'll talk about that. Inshore areas, so be places like in Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay and the inshore areas of the Florida Keys. They settle, metamorphose again into a little lobster. You can see at the top right there that looks a little more like an actual lobster, a different color pattern. And that animal lives in the algae and seagrasses and places like that until they get bigger and start joining together, aggregating, and eventually becoming adults. So just to kind of step through that, here's a female that we're showing you there on the left. You can see she's got these bright orange eggs and egg mass there. Now, of course, if you're collecting them, for you guys, you're not allowed to collect lobsters when they have eggs. It's an obvious conservation measure. We want them to produce lots of babies for next year, so we want to leave them. But some of you may have noticed that black, what some people call tar spot right there between the legs. And what that is called a spermatophore. So these animals have external fertilization. So this female has actually mated a second time, and that's the sperm packet that the male has transferred to her. So once she gets rid of this set of eggs and releases it in the water, about 2 to 3 weeks later, she'll get ready and do another clutch of eggs, and she'll scratch open that black tar spot, and inside there is where the sperm is, and that's where then the eggs will be fertilized. She cups her tail up underneath there, and that fertilization process occurs as the eggs come out, and she scratches that spermatophore. They get fertilized right there under her tail and then attach under her tail. And here on the right, you can see a close-up of some of the eggs. If you look real close, you can see some little dark little spots there, and those are actually the eye spots of the new larvae that are going to develop. And this is what the little larvae look like once they first hatch. Not at all like a lobster, more like a little spider. But as I was mentioning, they go through about 20 different stages as they grow, and start the size of a kind of a pinhead and eventually get the size of a silver dollar. The entire time they're in the plankton, and they are predators of other plankton. Well, eventually then, as I said, about 20 miles offshore, they metamorphose from that strange looking creature to something like, looks a little more like a lobster, but it's still transparent. These guys do not even feed during that time. They basically have one function in life, that's to get from the offshore environment to the inshore environment. So this is the one that they swim. They literally swim forward. So they put their actually antennae in front of them together, and they use the pleopods, that is the little swimmerets under the tail, and they swim forward, kind of like Superman, with their arms forward, their antennae forward, I should say, and they swim inshore at night during the new moon, near the surface waters, in fact. When they reach nursery habitat, they then go to the bottom and metamorphose into this, which we call an early benthic juvenile stage. What are they seeking? Well, up in the top left there, you can see a lot of algae and sea whips and all. That algae is a species called Laurencia, and that's the algae that gives off the chemical that attracts the lobsters. All lobsters around the world use either the chemical scent of an algae or the chemical scent of some seagrasses to orient. Now, you will find them in other kind of places too. You'll find them on some mangroves and seagrass bed, but they really prefer that algae habitat in shallow waters. They do not settle in deep water. So all these species, the juveniles, all live within, water that's, less than 15 feet deep. None of the young ones do. Now, that's different for the spotted lobster. The spotted lobster we're talking about that lives on the reef, it actually settles on the reef and never leaves. So the two species have very, very different life histories. Now, when these little lobsters get about this size, they come out of the algae and start looking. At this point in time, they are chemically attracted to other lobsters. So that's why you find them all together. They can literally smell one another. They aggregate, they're attracted to one another, and they group up when they get a little bit bigger, because now they're using group defense against their predators. You can imagine when they're really small, group defense doesn't help you. You're just a bigger mouthful for a predator. So when they're really small and in that algae, they're separated. They're all by themselves. You'll never hardly ever see them. But it's when they get a little bit bigger, they start coming together when they're big enough to actually start defending themselves as a group. And you'll see sometimes in shallow water areas quite large groups. And these are all animals here, lobsters under a small coral head here, that have been attracted to one another because they smell one another and they get attracted to that. Now at night they'll wander around and feed, but during the day they aggregate like this. Now some of you may be aware of or seen on TV these long migrations, these queues. It was my major professor at Florida State that studied this, and I've helped out a little bit with some BBC film teams and others to help them get some footage for this kind of thing. This is a peculiar kind of thing. You'll see lobsters in the Florida Keys doing this sometimes, but the best places to see this if you're going to dive is off the coast of Bimini or down in Cancun, like Alamoras. And in those places, you'd want to go out at night, but it tends to be in October. And what it really is these guys make these migrations. They don't go very far. They're literally just going from shallow water into deeper water. And the cue for this is a rapid drop in temperature and turbulence. And that's what we get, of course, in October and November. We start to get these cold fronts that start coming through. And that's what triggers this kind of behavior. And these long distance migrations can be, I shouldn't say it. It's not a long distance migration. These long queues of animals can be a couple hundred animals. But they're usually only going from, again, shallow inshore areas to deeper parts of the reef. They're not walking all over the Caribbean. Why? It's too cold. Lobsters, for example, if anybody tells you lobsters are walking between Cuba and Florida, they don't know what they're talking about. They're knuckleheads. They don't. It's too cold there. These are tropical species. They cannot exist at those depths. And so, I mean, we've tested all this many, many times. So they're only walking into deeper areas, but the adult lobsters do not leave Florida. They're stuck there because it's too deep around there. They can't walk to the Bahamas. They cannot walk to Cuba. And again, it's not the depth. They can handle the pressure. It's the cold that they cannot handle. So, of course, they'll wander out to the reefs, and you get these animals, so you tend to see them out on the reefs. And that's where all the mating takes place and all the males and the females out there. A lot of people ask me how old lobsters get. And to be honest, for many, many years, we didn't know. Now, growth, it's a complicated thing to figure out. Of course, the bigger it is, the older it is in general, but there's a lot of things that can kind of change that relationship. Males grow faster than females, for example. Temperature can affect their growth rates, how much they eat. Injuries can affect their growth rates. And here's the key thing that made it very difficult for years. We don't have, until recently, we had no direct measure of the age of lobsters. Why? Because lobsters, like all other arthropods, like insects and stuff, when they grow, they have to shed their outer skeleton, their exoskeleton. So they don't keep any hard parts. So they're not like, humans that have teeth, or trees that have tree rings, or clams that have rings, or fishes that have rings on their bones. So there's nothing, for years, we couldn't find anything with which to age them. But my research team has found another way we can age them, and I'll show you an example of that. Now, first, though, here, I don't know if any of you know, but fishes can actually be aged pretty easily from their bones. The typical what they do is we actually have to remove an ear bone. So this is not something, you have to kill a fish to do this. But just like rings on a tree, fishes and clams and other things, as they grow, they put down more bony material, calcium carbonate. And you can see here with the little blue dots, this is what we call an ear bone, an otolith. You can see the rings, and you can count those rings very clearly. And this is a European fish called a European plaice, and it's 10 years old. There are 10 little blue dots there. Well, following up on some work that some people had done up in Canada with some crabs, it looks like there might be some hard parts that are left in the stomachs of lobsters. So this is something called gastric, like stomach ossicles. So these are hard parts. They're like, lobsters have kind of like what a chicken has, this chicken gizzard. So it's a grinding mechanism in their stomachs. And it looks like that retains bands. So not quite as clear as you could see before, but this is a part, here's a micrograph. So these are microscope images. We've taken a small piece of the stomach out, these teeth in the stomach, and you can clearly see that there are bands, and we get annual bands with subannual bands. And here is an ossicle from a 10-year-old Florida spiny lobster. So, so how old is a lobster like this? Our work suggests that these guys are probably on a big lobster like that, which you'd probably only find on the dry Tortugas, is less than 20 years old. Somewhere, the clawed lobsters grow much slower because they're temperature. And so some of those clawed American lobsters can be literally 100 years old because it's much colder and they grow slower. But these are tropical guys. They grow faster. They have a shorter lifespan. So it's rare. Most of the lobsters that you guys are catching, believe it or not, so as soon as they get legal size, so the legal size lobster in Florida is only about 1.5 years old. That's since it landed on the floor there, the seafloor. So they grow quite rapidly. About 90% of the lobsters that are caught in Florida are less than 3 years old. So we're finished up sort of the basic idea of Lobster 101. Let me tell you about some more of the work that we've done that you might find interesting. And one is talking about lobster homelessness. And of course, you define homelessness, that's having nowhere to live. I'm going to talk about pestilence in lobsters. That's a deadly or virulent disease. We're pretty um, familiar with that ourselves now with the COVID-19 things. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about alien encounters, and not the ET kind, but another type of encounter. So let's first talk about the sad homelessness, the lobster that has no place to go. And what's a homeless lobster look like? Well, that's what you've seen already. This is the larval stage of a spiny lobsters. All spiny lobsters have this. And as I was mentioning, because they're in the water column for so long and they're caught in the open, not inshore, these are open oceans, these things travel throughout the Caribbean. So Florida's population is intimately linked to populations elsewhere in the Caribbean. The lobsters from Florida, probably most of them speak Spanish, because most of the lobsters from Florida are coming from, you'll see, in Mesoamerica or Central America areas. So here's the entire Caribbean. So this really represents, at least on the Caribbean side, not the Pacific side, the basic range of the species, and they can literally travel during that 7 to 9 month period of time throughout the Caribbean. Now, what are the typical larval durations for marine animals? Well, the shortest known larval duration are for things like sponges and like sea squirts. Now, they produce larvae too, that up in the plankton, but they're only in the plankton just a few hours. Mollusks, that is things like clams and snails and things like that, they have about 1 to 3. They have planktonic larvae that are in the plankton 1 to 3 weeks. Crabs, usually in the 4 to 6 weeks. Most fishes, most Caribbean fishes, it's about 2 months, sometimes 3 months, but somewhere in the sort of half, maybe 2 weeks to whatever. Corals, people ask me about corals. Corals have a planktonic larval duration of about 2 weeks. But look at spiny lobsters. Depending on the species, it's anywhere from 6 to 24 months. So in the Caribbean, it's about like I said, about 7 months. So during that period of time, they can get transported throughout the Caribbean. And I'm not going to go to the details of the research we've done, but we've done a number of experiments, laboratory experiments, field studies, fancy computer modeling on supercomputers. It takes all that together for us to figure out where these lobsters come from and go to. And as I said, these little guys may be homeless, but they're not just passive particles. So you can't use a very simple model. What you're seeing in here, we're starting to zoom in. These are some larvae that we hatched in the lab, and you can see that they swim around, and they're actually, depending on their size, attracted to light or repelled by light. So they actually change their depth in the water column daily. That is, they tend to go up near the surface at night. During the day, they go down deeper in the water. And they also, as they get older, they change where they are. Now, many of you probably are aware that currents change with different depths too. So actually determining where lobster larvae go is not a simple matter. You can't just look at surface currents. It's a very complex thing, which is why we've had to go to some pretty sophisticated experiments and computer-based modeling to figure out where the connections are between larvae in the Caribbean. So just to generalize then, to give you a feel then what's going on, we've put together a little graphic here based on years and years of research we did. But you can see here, this is the kind of a typical coastline, even like you'd see off Florida. You have on the right there the coral reef and the nursery habitat, and behind that the shelf, the continental shelf, and then the very deep pelagic area. And the numbers on the left actually are in meters, right? So you'd have to multiply those 3 by 3 approximately to get in feet. So those are water depths in meters. Well, the females, of course, spawn their eggs right near the edge of the coral reef. The females move to the deeper parts of the reef to give off the larvae when their eggs hatch. And for the first 3 months, those early stage larvae migrate day and night up and down the water column, but they stayed in the surface waters down to about 90 feet or so, something like that. So it's about 30 meters is all the deeper they go each day. But then we found after about 3 months in the plankton, there's a very abrupt change in their behavior, and they avoid the light. And they still migrate day and night, but they do that in deeper waters. And so they tend to do that down to almost 400 feet in daily. But once they get to that 7 or 8 month lifespan in the plankton, there are physiological changes that happen, and they get off the shelf, and that's where the metamorphosis comes. And it's there that they change into that transparent post larvae that then actively swims inshore at night during those new moon periods of time. So that's how the larval behavior for these guys works. Very, very complex. There's a species in Western Australia that lives off of, in the Perth area in Western Australia. It does the same sort of thing, but instead of being swirled around the Caribbean, it goes way out in the Indian Ocean, 2,000 kilometers, so about 1,500 miles, and then comes back. Amazing that these sort of things, these animals have evolved these life histories. So where do Florida's baby lobsters go? When a female spawns in Florida, where do they go? Well, to be honest, in Florida, most of Florida's lobsters don't end up anywhere. Only about 9–10%, these are from our modeling estimates, go to the Bahamas. A small fraction of them go to Cuba. Most of them are actually caught in the Gulf Stream, in the Florida current, and are pushed up into the North Atlantic. And in fact, they're the ones that Florida's lobsters outside of the Caribbean give rise to probably some of the lobsters that occur off North Carolina. They're also the same species that occurs in Bermuda, and they may be coming from Florida. And on occasion, they'll get lobsters, the larvae make it all the way around the North Atlantic and land in the Cape Verde Islands off Africa. But most of Florida lobsters, frankly, are probably lost. They don't really find suitable habitat. But where do Florida's lobsters come from? Well, only about 20%, our estimates are, of the lobsters from Florida coming back into Florida. And those are primarily ones that spawn out in the dry Tortugas and the Marquesas and places like that, much to the south. But as you come up and towards the Middle Keys and certainly all up along the east coast of Florida, a lot of those are lost. So not very few Florida's lobsters come back to Florida. Most of Florida's lobsters are coming from other places in the Caribbean. The majority, if you see, we're actually getting them from places like Nicaragua, Honduras are the most abundant. But we get some from Cuba, but some as far away as Venezuela. And not only have we been able to demonstrate this with our modeling, but we can now use genetics to help us figure out where they're coming from. So it's a pretty cosmopolitan group of lobsters that find their way here to Florida.
Keep telling myself that I won't take long till I'm free of my disease. I'm free of my disease. Oh, set me free of my disease. Oh,
Sorry, but I had to wait for that sax at the end, man. It is so rocking. I love it. So, disease, pestilence. Well, are lobsters affected by disease? Yeah, you bet they are. Of course, we humans are. For many, many years, people talked about wide-scale disease. They refer to things like the Black Death that hit Europe and others areas. But now we know about worldwide pandemics like the COVID-19. But just like in humans, where you have these massive die-offs, we can, and there are different species of animals, fishes and others, can have massive diseases that can sweep through the seas as well. So we do have these worldwide pandemics that occur, not only in humans, but animals experience these too. But really, disease, much like kids who get chickenpox or measles or something like that, most diseases in the wild do not cause massive mortalities. They're a little less obvious. And in fact, if you look at these species here, there's we've got some acanthurids. This is a fish up there. You got corals, you got lobsters, seagrasses here, shrimps. But every single one of the individuals you're seeing here has some kind of disease. Okay, although diseases can wipe out marine creatures just like they do humans from time to time, most of the diseases are ones that are not as well known and tend to focus on in juveniles, young ones, and are not necessarily lethal in all cases. Now, just like we humans have ways to protect ourselves from diseases in different ways, and we're all now very familiar with this, in the natural world, there are ways that have been involved, these animals have evolved ways to avoid diseases as well. Many of you, if you're divers around here, are familiar with some of the shrimps and cleaner fishes that clean the various fishes, like this grouper here. So Mother Nature has ways to clean and remove various pathogens, and we, of course, more recent years, we know about quarantining and ways in which we humans have socially isolate to avoid the transmission of disease. And about, I don't know now, gosh, it's over 15 years ago, we discovered the same thing in lobsters. And we published a paper in 2006 based on work we'd done a few years with the Caribbean spiny lobster. That was the first known instance in anywhere in the wild, any animal at all, where a social animal, like a spiny lobster that normally likes to be together, can tell when another animal is diseased and they isolate themselves. I won't go through all the details, but in this case, it is also a lethal virus that we discovered in Florida. And believe it or not, a healthy lobster can smell the scent of a diseased lobster, and they will not go anywhere near them. So this is a very interesting case, and a lot of people now have talked about this in recent years when the whole thing with COVID and social distancing. And here's a perfect case where the Caribbean spiny lobster has found a way to social distance to avoid spreading a virus. And this virus is called PAV1. We named it that because that's short for Panularis argus virus 1. Now, my team, my research team, including one of my former PhD students, Don Berenger, who's a professor at the University of Florida, we discovered this in 1999 down in the Florida Keys, first discovery of this. It was the first known virus in any lobster as well. And the ones that are particularly susceptible to this are the really small juveniles. So a lot of the animals that you don't normally see, certainly if you're diving for bigger lobsters, the bigger lobsters, the adults are asymptomatic and they're not carriers. So basically adults don't get it. So this is really a disease of the young. Unlike COVID, this is really a disease of the young. But like COVID, it's transmitted through close association among lobsters. So you can imagine that, if they're social, they're going to try to avoid one another. This could be a pretty effective way by avoiding other lobsters to keep the virus at bay. But it's pretty lethal for the young lobsters. We estimate that about a quarter of those little post-larval lobsters that come in and settle in South Florida, about a fourth of them die of this disease before anyone ever sees them when they're tiny, just like an inch long. Don't worry, it's not a human health risk. This virus does not harm humans, and besides, you're not going to be eating the tiny 1 inch long ones. The adults don't have it, and even if they did, you cook it. So so this is not a human health thing. But we've now done studies around the Caribbean, and we know that this virus occurs in other areas of the Caribbean. Not everywhere, but it has its hot spots in different areas in the Caribbean. But one of the things that was most interesting to us, again, and we've done a number of studies over the years, is that this idea that they have, just like humans now, that these animals practice the social distancing as a way to have what we call behavioral immunity. And it works very, very effectively. And so what really keeps this disease at bay and not affecting many more is the fact that healthy lobsters avoid diseased lobsters. And there are a lot of you can't see this graphic, but there's we've since then, and this is a recent paper we published in the journal Bioscience, we've since done some investigation, and after we found the whole scenario with lobsters, other people started looking around. And this kind of stuff occurs with ants and bees and other fishes, with tadpoles and birds and mice and kangaroos and baboons and chimpanzees. So it turns out this idea of social distancing is not just something we humans invented. It's actually been around for millions of years in other species. We just didn't know about it, that they too can use social distancing to reduce the spread of disease in the wild. Now, when you think of alien encounters, You might think of, War of the Worlds or something, like that. Who knows? Maybe Jeff Bezos today has brought back, and his crew brought back something, some alien from the edge of space. And when aliens interact with us humans, it's usually not a good thing. There tends to be a negative consequence of our interactions with aliens as they interact with human populations in cities and other places. And it's the same thing with lobsters. Lobsters too are affected by aliens. They're these, just like in World of Worlds or something like these aliens drop these big traps from up in the sky, and they drop down. The lobsters are collecting them, and these big traps take the lobsters right up out of the sea, and they disappear, and their loved ones never see them again. And I mean, who knows where they go? Well, we know where they go. They go to our dinner plates. So for lobsters, we are the aliens, of course, and we can have a pretty big effect on lobster populations. Now, lobsters turn out to be a species that are actually a pretty good species for fishing. They have the kind of life history characteristics. They grow fast, they produce lots of young, and so on and so forth, that they can be, if properly managed, they can be sustainably fished for many years. And so there are actually a number of species of lobsters who have the stamp of approval that are sustainably fished. But just like any species, you can overdo it. And there are species that are heavily overfished. And in fact, most of the species of lobsters around the world are listed as kind of on the edge of or overfished because of just too much pressure. They can be fished, but one can overdo it. Now, what are the effects of overfishing lobsters? Well, I mean, one of the obvious things, of course, is the more you overfish, you start to see a decline in the numbers, their abundance. And what does that do? I mean, who cares if their abundance goes down? Well, obviously, it has negative impacts on fishery economics. If you're divers, if we don't have as many, and you're out during the 2-day lobster season and looking for them, if we don't have a good year, or if abundance continues to go down, well, you're not going to be able to find them. But of course, there are actually a lot of other ecosystem effects. Lobsters aren't just there. It's not like they don't play any role in the ecosystem. So we do see what we call cascading effects of lobsters, both as prey and predators in these systems. But another thing that we actually looked at, and a lot of our research teams looked at, is isn't necessarily what the effect of fishing has on lobster abundance, but the effect that it has on the size of individuals. Now, nobody goes fishing. No fishing tournament or lobster tournament gives awards out for the smallest lobsters at all, or the smallest fish. Everybody wants the biggest individuals. But to be honest, in many species, although we humans might think, oh, it's cool to get that big giant lobster, that's really not a very good strategy if we want to keep these species around, because the removal of larvae individuals from the population has a lot of negative effects on reproduction, and therefore the long-term stability of these species. So hold on just a second. I'm going to hook my computer up. It's getting a little low on juice. There we go. And it turns out that large individuals are particularly important in fish and in crustaceans. Why? Well, because they continue to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And bigger fish and bigger lobsters produce more eggs. So as you can imagine, then it's the largest individuals that produce the most eggs. So we've done here, I'm showing you one data slide here, but there's a very strong relationship between the size of the females and the number of eggs they produce. And it's not a linear relationship. It's actually what we call a logarithmic kind of relationship. So you see a picture there. That's actually a female lobster from New Zealand, and all those little dots you see, that's a female spawning her eggs into the sea. But this graph is very simple graph. On the bottom is size of the lobster. So we measure the carapace length. That's from basically between the eyes to where the tail begins. And so as the size gets bigger, on the y-axis over is how many millions of eggs they produce. And they produce a lot of eggs. It depends on the size. So when they're small lobsters, and each of the lines are just different species of lobster, but you can see that each line tends to increase quite a bit as they get bigger. So the effects of females is really, really important in these situations. If you remove all the bigger females, we lose a lot of eggs. But it's not just the females, though. it's very interesting with crustaceans in general. I know some of you people out there may think you've perfected sex, but in reality, it's lobsters who've perfected sex. And how, if you really think about this, what's perfect sex? Now, forget this is not an R-rated or X-rated presentation. And biologically, what we say about the perfection of sex means is how many sperm you produce per egg. If you're really, really efficient, you should only have to produce one sperm from one egg, and bingo, you're good, right? That's the most efficient. And obviously, we humans, we produce millions and millions of sperm for each egg that's produced. But lobsters, believe it or not, have a very different ratio. Lobsters only have about a 20-to-1 ratio. They only produce about 20 sperm per egg. So in other words, sperm can be limiting, and they literally kind of males actually ration sperm to the females to produce it. So it's a very tightly coupled, a very efficient mating system. And that's why they've perfected sex. It's very, very efficient. And so one of the problems is when we overfish and remove like big males like this one, it completely destroys the mating system. In a natural population of lobsters, unfished population, they have a system that we call a lek mating system. That is, it's dominated by large males. It's a lot like you'd see like with elephant seals, for example, out on the West Coast or something, where big males defend a territory and the females come there. And so, frankly, in an unfished lobster population, that's what goes on. The big males dominate the mating system. But in Florida, we don't have that. You see it in the tortugas. The tortuga still has a natural mating system. But Florida, we've removed so many of the big individuals. What we get is what we call a scramble competition. Basically, we've kind of lost all structure of the mating system, and there's just kind of this random mating system going on. And why are we worried about those large males? Well, remember, it turns out that males, because they produce so few sperm, losing big males can have a big effect. Larger males, they mate with more females, and larger females, they produce more sperm of actually better quality. And they actually can restore their sperm charges much faster. So the bottom line of this is probably one of the biggest issues with overfishing lobsters throughout the world is that not only we reduce their numbers, but when we reduce the size of the big ones, we really kind of lose reproduction. Of course, if you don't have reproduction, you don't have a lot of new young ones. So what's the solution to this? And we've studied this, of course, as well. And I won't go into details, but with a lot of research we've done with both laboratory, field experiments, and also work we've done with modeling, we've come up with what we think is the best way that we could rebuild the numbers of lobsters in the Caribbean and in Florida and sustain their long-term availability for all of us who like to fish for lobsters. And believe me, I like eating lobsters too. They're not like pets to me. And what we did is, the idea here, the solution that we believe, is to combine marine protected areas, MPAs, with what we call slot limits. Now, you have slot limits in a lot of coastal fisheries for things like whatever, snook and redfish. And it just means a slot limit, you have both a minimum size limit, you can't catch small ones, but you have a maximum size limit too. Now, currently, the lobster fisheries here in Florida and the rest of the Caribbean only have a minimum size limit. But if we had a maximum size limit, that would also protect some of the really big spawning ones and would help us. And in fact, what we found is if we only took 2% of the area, the sea in Florida, 2%, and put it in marine protected areas for lobsters, and if we had a maximum size of 5.5 inches of carapace length, within 15 years, we could increase the number of lobsters by about 30%. So that's a pretty significant change. Excuse me. Now, only in Florida right now, there's something like 0.1% of the areas are marine protected areas. So we've got a ways to go to get to that 2%. And at 5.5 inches, nobody's catching those anyway. 99% of the lobsters that are currently caught are less than 5 inches. So it's not like we'd have to give up a lot of lobsters if we would set these rules in place. But anyway, this is what our research tells us. Now, I'm not a manager. I'm not a marine I'm not a marine fisheries commissioner or anything like that. So all we can do is make these recommendations based on science, and we'll see what happens in the future. But for now, I think there's again, lobsters are a species we can fish, and I hope you guys will enjoy the next few weeks if you're going to be out lobster fishing. Thanks for taking the time to attend my presentation here. Good luck hunting those lobsters, and I'll take some questions now if you have any.
All right. Well, thank you. That was fantastic. And we even had the cool video music effects to each section. I like that. We do have some questions. First one actually is coming from me. So you're working extensively with the FWC guys to kind of make these rules. How often do they call you up and get the research aspect of making these rules?
Well, to be honest, the rules are not made by scientists. Every place in the country, the Marine Fisheries commissioners are appointed by the governors. And so rarely are there scientists. Now, they have scientific staff who recommend it. So all we can do is recommend it. But frankly, all these decisions are made are political decisions. And so even the folks at FWC does not make these rules. They enforce them. But it's the Marine Fisheries Commissions that make the rules, and they're all appointed by the governor.
Okay. All right. So we've got some questions coming in. So they wanted to know the population of the lobsters here in like Palm Beach County compared to, or like Palm Beach and Broward County compared to the Keys and Bahamas. I know you kind of touched on that. Could you just reiterate what those populations are?
Well, again, they're all part of the same, population. These animals that you're getting there, again, because of that long post-larval period, they're all coming from way further south in the Caribbean. Now, you might ask the question why, many of them, and further north you go in Florida, they tend to get bigger. And so, well, why is that? Well, to be honest, one thing is that you have less fishing pressure. You don't have nearly as much commercial fishing out there, so they have time to grow bigger. And there may be some better food sources, but it's not that they're coming from any different sources or anything like that. They're all coming from the same places. It's just, frankly, the fishing pressure up there is less, so there's more big ones.
And I think it's kind of interesting because we get some divers that dive in the northern part of the Palm Beach County, or actually out of Palm Beach County, in like Martin, and so they're getting bigger lobsters. So as you move up the coast of Florida, do you guys notice that there are the larger lobsters?
Absolutely. You get them also on the West Coast too. And it's just because the commercial fishing, where the intense fishing is all in South Florida. And of course, the commercial fishing takes most of the lobsters. The recreational fishing, the estimates are in Florida that recreational fishers take about 20% of the total. So 80% are being taken by the commercial fishermen. And so it's just when you get further north of Florida, there's just fewer commercial fishermen. So there's more they're able to grow bigger, and divers are the ones that primarily get them.
That's great. That actually answered one of the questions. The mini season, is it damaging the stocks? And what you're saying is it's the commercial fisheries that, take more of the population than us recreational divers taking.
Yeah. And, Florida's weird. That 20% figure is the biggest in the world. Now, people all over the world collect lobsters by diving, but usually it's really, really small. Even from where you're from, Nicole, in Southern California, there's a lot of divers there who take them, but no place is the recreational fishing for lobsters as big as it is in South Florida. It composes. So the recreational guys take a lot here in Florida. But it's still a much smaller fraction compared to the commercial lobsters. And so,
well, I can tell you, it's a little harder out in California. They don't let you use all those tools like they do here in Florida. So you got to go in there and grab them with just your hands, basically, out there in California.
Right.
I don't like sticking my hands in holes that I don't know what's in the back of them. So,
and I see the question about mini season. Mini season started primarily. I'm an old dude, so I've been working in the Keys, like I said, for Lord knows, almost 40 years. Mini season, there didn't used to be a mini season. It was completely brought up. It was created by the tourism industry in the Florida Keys, and so it used to be on weekends too, and it was too crazy. So they moved it to the middle of the week. But it's basically just a way that the recreational fishing folks had a strong enough lobby that they were able to get the Fisheries Commission to create the mini season for one reason, that is simply just to get recreational fishermen a shot at it before the commercial guys do. So again, it really doesn't have a huge any more bigger impact on the lobsters than do the commercial guys. It just gives you guys a shot at them a little earlier. It's a political decision.
Definitely. So do you know what the recreational size landing in Florida is of a spiny lobster size?
What the catches are?
Like,
right now the catches, the record.
Yeah, the record.
Okay. I don't know. I can tell you my record. Let's see if any, no, I don't catch them, eat them. We're doing experiments to turn it back. But the biggest ones I've caught, and of course, they're out in Tortugas. It was, I think in millimeters, we scientists. So we measure it by the carapace length, so the back. So I'll give you the numbers, and those of you interested, you can go calculate it. So the carapace length, that's the back of the thing. The biggest one I ever caught was a big male that was 210 millimeters carapace length. Now, that is huge. The recreational size limit is 76 millimeters. So that was almost 3 times the size of a typical recreation. And that's a huge lobster, compared to what you normally see.
And so, when they get that big, people want to know, are they good eating at that size, or is it better to take the smaller ones?
Yeah, I think when they get a little older, I think they get a little too chewy myself. I prefer the ones, the legal size ones I think are better. Now, by the way, the minimum legal size, why is it that whatever it is, 3 1/4, again, I think 76 millimeters? To be honest, this is something that everybody sets in fisheries biology. And what it is, the minimum size is usually set, the size at which 50% of the population has grown large enough to reproduce one time. Mm-hmm. So almost all minimum sizes for all fisheries around the world are set at this kind of strange arbitrary number, where 50%. Now, frankly, if this were humans, all right, this is human, think about when do 50% of the females, let's say, for example, can they have kids? It'd probably be around, I don't know, 12 maybe or something like that.
Yeah.
So in that case, we'd be killing all the female humans that are above 12 years old, because that would leave half of them to be able to reproduce one time. So this is, some of the rules and regulations, again, are applied sort of broad scale across a lot of species, but they don't always make sense for each individual species. I would like to see, if I were king for the day, I would change the size limits a little bit. I would actually make it a slot limit, make the smaller ones I'd make the slot a little bit narrower, and I think in the long term we'd all be better off for it.
Gotcha. So we have a question about, is there a part of the lobster that can regenerate, so that when a part is gone, is it gone forever, or that can't regenerate?
Yeah. Well, they can regenerate legs and they can regenerate antennae. Okay. But the weirdest thing is they can regenerate eyes. But if you pluck the eye off a lobster, you know what comes back? A little antennae. They don't regenerate eyes. They have little antennae come back, because the eyes and the antennae are both they're both, they're all nerves, and they're neurosensory kind of thing. So it's kind of freaky. If a lobster gets, like if a triggerfish comes in and plucks off his eye or something like that, if you ever find a little lobster that instead of having an eye, it's got this little antennae, it means it's lost its eye and it's regenerated that. But they can regenerate legs and they can regenerate antennae. That's the only thing they can regenerate on a regular basis.
Yeah. But
it takes a lot of growth, energy from them, as you might imagine. So that's one of the things, you recreational guys, the biggest problem with the recreational fishing for lobsters is people busting them all up. When we do it, a tail snare is a good way, and of course a net and a tickle stick is a good way if they're out in a little bit. But try to avoid busting them up, because when you do, can they survive? Yeah, but you've hurt them. It's not like it doesn't hurt them, and that's energy that could be putting into growth for the next year or reproduction. So that's, for those of you recreational, try not to bust them up. That the ones you're going to release, of course. If you're going to eat, if they're big enough to keep, it doesn't matter, right? But if they're ones you're going to release, try not to bust them up.
Excellent. Well, yeah. So, guys, if you want to check out on the 4C not the Facebook page, the website www.force-e.com, you're going to see right there we have a great landing page about spiny lobster season, mini season, regular season. Do you have everything you need? We actually have video here of Sam and I talking about the tips and tricks on lobster hunting. We did that one last year on Facebook Live. So if you want to watch that again, that video lives on that page. Also, if you're looking to get a great recipe for your lobsters that you're catching, go to our Cooking the Local Catch. We have the video there as well. And right there, there's all those regulations, things you're going to need to go out and harvest your own lobsters for mini season or regular season. And it tells you all the information there, and it clicks onto the website for the FWC. And just remember, guys, we are here for you. We have special hours during mini season, all 3 stores. So make sure you go in, say hello to the guys, and get the gear to get you out there and go diving and catch lobster. You can get it online. We've got an online store for all this stuff, or we can have it in store for you as well. So make sure you check out that page, guys, because it's got a lot of great information, and we want to make sure that everyone's staying safe. Okay, so one thing is, on Thursday, I secured the Divers Alert Network guys are going to do a presentation about mini season and how to avoid injuries and accidents during that time and what the history of mini season is. So if you're interested in that presentation, go to our website and you can click on the link for that. We're going to be doing that Thursday, this Thursday, the 22nd at 6:30 p.m. And it's a little bit different. We're not going to do it on Facebook Live like we normally do because they're doing it in their big fancy studio. But we'll be sharing that on our timeline. So if you guys are interested in learning more about mini season, and the guys from Divers Alert Network is going to give a great presentation. And thank you, Dr. Butler. We definitely appreciate the fantastic presentation. So many cool, interesting facts about lobster that I know there's stuff I didn't know, but I was sitting here in amazement that I didn't know some of this stuff, and I'm a trained biologist myself. So thank you.
Well, let me just say, Nicole, too, I know we weren't able to get to everybody's questions, but for those who, if you have a question you're really burning and we don't have time for, just look me up on at FIU, Florida International University, and Department of Biological Sciences and the Institute of Environment. You'll find my my email there, and I'll be happy to answer your questions via email. Okay, so just look me up on the FIU website.
That's great. That's a great resource to know. Thank you. And then, guys, you guys have been waiting also. Who wants to know if they won a $50 gift card to 4C? So here is our random name picker. Everyone's name is loaded into it. And let's go ahead and see who's going to get $50 to go shopping with 4C. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And here it is, guys. Robin Murray. Robin, you are the winner of a $50 gift card to 4C. Come on in, get your lobster gear. And guys, don't forget, it is getting to be mini season. It's going to get really crazy. And that's when you want to get your dive gear serviced or your tank serviced. So make sure that you're coming into 4C early. Don't wait until the last minute, because that's when everybody does. And then we want to make sure you guys get your gear so you can get those lobsters this mini season. So come in early, come in this week, come in this weekend. Don't wait. We would love to see you. All right, Dr. Butler, we are out of time, but we thank you so much for the great presentation, and happy hunting, everybody, and great time. See you later.